Bracha.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My usual Jerusalem update. So I'm sitting here with air conditioning on, for it has been 37 degrees, rather hot, which has caused a bit of an interesting situation. Children went back to school, now all of the grades. However, they were meant to wear their masks from a certain grade and above. And now it's too hot to wear those masks. So some schools are closed again. Each principal is deciding, but that's quite an interesting situation. Giving permission to take off the masks because the heat is more of an issue right now. So I'm sure you're all jealous of the heat. And it's not just hot, it's beautiful, sunny, looking out at the wonderful views we have here from our porch. The one more comment, we've also been told that next week, restaurants will be opening. They've been open just for takeout and delivery, but now people will be able to actually sit at the restaurants. But I understand from what Batya told me and a YouTube that she showed me that we're gonna have to buy catcher mitts. Everybody know what a catcher mitt is? Because apparently the waiters are gonna be standing so far away from you and just throwing the plates at you when you order. So you've gotta be a good catch. And we continue to have a good sense of humor. I hope everybody has stayed well. We meet this afternoon in anticipation of Yom Yerushalayim and Shavuot. And we will begin. We will be looking equally at, or perhaps even more, at a contemporary text, but looking at them very carefully, as we will with still some text from the Tanakh.
If you see the text, just put a thumbs up, please. Just want to make sure you see it. Thank you.
Didn't I bring her up well? Thank you. Okay, we would have heard grumblings. So we begin with this quote from a 16-year-old boy from Yerushalayim. And he says, in Tel Aviv, I feel like a 16-year-old Israeli. In Jerusalem, I feel like a 3,000-year-old Jew. I would say that these two statements by this 16-year-old is really the thesis of my talk today. I'm looking for the people in Jerusalem to maintain that sense of us being a part of this long chain that began so long ago. But also it's good to take a break from ancient Jerusalem and participate in modern Jerusalem, and to even sometimes leave Yerushalayim to go to Tel Aviv. At the same time, I would like to see people in Tel Aviv appreciate Yerushalayim. And I'm happy to say that we will refer to examples today of that being something, Yerushalayim and its ancient text, being something that people in Tel Aviv and what that represents are becoming thirsty for. So let us begin with our first text from Sefer Dvarim, Deuteronomy, as Moshe is remembering Bnei Israel, the Israelites, standing at Har Sinai. Now, you know that I like to read very closely, and I'm going to ask you, after I read these first three psukim, what is the most important word in my eyes? And Moshe called unto all Israel and said unto them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I speak in your ears this day, that ye may learn them and observe to do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all of us here alive this day. So anybody want to suggest what I think is the most important word, or what word do you think is, and then I'll convince you that I'm right.
I like the word covenant.
Okay, why?
It's something that we've had for history and that we stand on. We've built on that word covenant. It's always been there.
Ongoing, eternal. Thank you, Shelley. Anybody else?
Yeah. Bracha, I'm looking at not one word, but alive this day popped out at me.
Okay, thank you, Tzipora. And why does that pop out at you?
Well, listen, we do that at Pesach too. Ke'ilu, we were there, and it's Ke'ilu, we got the covenant as if it's today.
Yafet, and we will return to that. Anybody else? So we've heard.
I would say that the word all and us.
Who is that? Because I don't see you.
It's Brenda.
Brenda, hi Brenda.
Hi there.
Okay, Brenda and I spent many years together weekly, and so she knows me the best. Yes, and Moses called unto all Israel, that three-letter word, or in Hebrew, El Kol Yisrael, to all of Israel. Now, why is that such a key word? Everything that Tzipora said, Shelley said, of course, all these words are meaningful. But why in our particular reading today is all so very important? Well, let's go on. It brings us back actually to something that we stated last week, whether you were there or weren't. I have a list. Actually, Shimon Bar Yochai thought that everyone should be studying Torah, but we know that we feel he was a bit too extreme. On the other hand, we know that Torah is meant to be exoteric, not esoteric, but for everyone. Everyone. And we'll return to that as well. So let's go on looking at chapter 30 now, verse 5. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which your fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thy heart and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. Now I want to ask you, why is there a need to not just say thy heart, but also and the heart of your children, the heart of thy seed? Why would it not have been enough to say that I'm going to teach you, I'm going to circumcise you, and it's going to go into your heart? He's talking to everyone, so why distinguish and say your heart and the heart of your seed? Anyone?
I think it's to emphasize the, giving the knowledge, from door to door, from generation to generation. It's not, we have to make sure that we keep teaching our children.
Thank you, Bev. Absolutely. I would just add, and you as a teacher and everyone gathered here, has taught either children, informally, formally, or friends, adults. We all know that everybody learns in a different way. And so that this already, we hear about modern education, modern pedagogy. Well, our Chazal sages and the Tanakh were already educators, very attuned to differentiation. And so it's saying it's going to go into your heart, but you might have to do it a little differently when you're teaching your children. Rav Kook, who was the first Ashkenazi rabbi and began in the time of the British Mandate, said the following in 1913, echoing what we've just said. We must translate our entire sacred treasury according to the current style. Almost the entire body of Jewish knowledge and sentiments must be made accessible to the people of our time. Rav Kook was very disturbed by the widespread abandonment of religious observance by the young generation, and so he frequently pleaded for new literature and teaching it in a way that would attract the young. Now we're looking at Rav Kook saying this. He wanted to reach that new generation. But again, this is the same Rav who welcomed the secular pioneers because he knew how absolutely necessary they are as the opening step to a life in Israel. Now, does anybody recognize the design under this quote by Rav Kook?
Yeah,
No?
it's the alphabet.
They're hieroglyphics, but I.
Oh, it's Hebrew alphabet.
Who said that?
Alan.
Alan. Okay. Now you're not that old, right? So you've seen that in a picture, right, Alan?
No, I've just been staring at it, and it makes sense.
Yes. Okay. So I don't know if you know this, but this was the original, the Paleo-Hebrew script that the Torah was written in and was used before we were exiled to Babylonia. When we returned from Babylonia, Ezra changed the script to the Ashurit, the more aesthetic script that we use till this day. Why did he do that? What was the key word in what I just said? Aesthetic. That he wanted to be sure that, again, the young generation would find reading the Hebrew inviting, welcoming. Very, very important. We continue with our next text. And these words, which I command thee this day, shall be upon thy heart. This is an example of one of those lines that I tell you that they'll sound more familiar to you in the Hebrew because we're used to reciting them. From the Shema, Vayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavcha.
From the Shema.
From the Shema. And this word, again, summarizes what was said earlier, I think by Tzipora, that she said hayom. When we look at that word hayom, that is an incredibly important statement. Even though this was being said way back then, when you and I today read that, it's so important because we all know if you receive a new letter, you're going to be much more anxious to open that up because it's fresh than something that's been lying around, unless for nostalgic reasons. And so the hope is, when God says this, that when we open up the Torah, that we're going to look at it as something that speaks to me today. And two of my favorite commentators, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, expressed this beautifully. So Hirsch, from the 19th century, a German founder of neo-orthodoxy, says the following in explaining this verse. The Torah of God shall never be to you like some ancient institution, an old letter about which nobody takes much interest anymore. This day, fresh like the light of dawn that greets you, fresh like the deep breath of pure air that you draw in, is the word of God to remain for you. Every day given to you just today, its contents to bring afresh to your mind the task of your life that new day. There is no greater enemy to our fulfilling the tasks of our lives than becoming blasé and carrying them out, than losing the freshness of recognizing them and the enthusiasm in performing them. I'm sure there is no one here that can't relate to that. And Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who is best known for having translated into modern Hebrew the entire Talmud from Aramaic, a wonderful, wonderful teacher, says what was said before about the covenant and it being eternal. We do not receive the Torah once. And even the name of Shavuot that's coming upon us, Zman Matan Toratenu. We don't say that we've received it, but it is yearly and daily given to us. So it's not just a one-time event. We receive it every day. And we do not all receive the same Torah. Incredible. Again, a rabbi of the Orthodox stream, not all receive the same Torah. Each of us receives the Torah meant just for us, because each of us is different. Now, I want you to look closely, and what do you see? This was done by an artist from the Jerusalem School of Art, Bezalel. What do you see? You're laughing.
Pregnant bellies.
Pregnant bellies.
The blossoming,
Taurus.
yeah, well, the blossoming forth of Torah. I mean, birth of Torah. I mean, there's lots of ways you can look at it. It's great.
The
Okay.
continuity is right there.
Yeah.
If
No,
that-
Door for door. Door for
Yes.
door.
Okay, so this is, I find so amazing and so significant. So the school had its students give their artistic interpretation of the significance of Torah scrolls and the text in which they were enveloping. So this particular student who designed these Torah scrolls was herself pregnant. Now, why is that so important? Because that echoes what we just said. You're going to look at the Torah at that particular moment. Maybe next year you'll see something different because of whatever's going on. But she being pregnant, that's what she related to. And that was what was on her mind or on her stomach. Now, what was the message that she was giving us? using that word pregnant? How was she describing the Torah and its richness? Pregnant, two more words, pregnant with meaning. That there is just so much to be gleaned. No matter who you are and no matter what you're going to take from it, what you're looking to take from it. Wonderful, wonderful. Somebody want to say something?
I think it also has a measure of responsibility. Like she's saying, I have this baby within me and within me the Torah, and we have to blend the two together. And my responsibility is to pass it on. I think that's fabulous.
Beautiful, Helen. Beautiful. Yeah. Absolutely. Very nice. Does anybody recognize this woman or her name?
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Ruth Calderon?
Yeah.
Somebody's saying, yeah. A very, very special woman. Was born in 1961. She came from a family that was traditional, but mamlachti, governmental school that did not have a religious stream. She at one time felt that something was missing, as we'll read in a moment. I don't know if you can recognize just by that picture where she is standing in 2013. Anybody?
She at the Kotel?
No, I can see why you're saying that. Anybody else? She was giving her acceptance speech at the Knesset, at the Israel parliament, where she was becoming a member of the parliament for 2 years in the Yair Lapid party, Yesh Atid. And what made her speech so special, and you can all find it, if not in English with subtitles in English, very worth listening to, is that she took this opportunity as someone who grew to feel something was missing in her education and went on to earn a doctorate in Talmud from Hebrew University and has opened 2 very important institutions, one in Tel Aviv that is Beit Midrash, a study hall for men and women, religious and secular. She teaches throughout the world, but at this particular moment, she is giving a lesson in Talmud to all the other members of Knesset. And let's just read what I'm calling contemporary text. At the outset of the revival of the Jewish homeland, the Talmud, she says, was kept from us to prevent, very strong words, contamination by the viruses of the unproductive and pale Jews of the diaspora. Now, don't be offended. She's talking about the time at the beginning of the state where it's known that Sabras were embarrassed by their parents, grandparents in the diaspora and almost put the blame on them because Sabras could not picture being so weak. And so we went to an extreme. And I mentioned Rav Kook welcoming the secular pioneers. We went to an extreme in feeling we're in our own land. And yes, Tanakh, Bible was studied, even in the secular, but we wanted to get away from the image of people learning Talmud in a yeshiva. Now, she says, for the first time and to the surprise of many of us, alongside the intrepid, eternally youthful champions of the 1948 War of Independence and the Six-Day War, new heroes began to emerge. Old men who lived out their days in the Beit Midrash. Through them, the grandparents we never had, we discovered the allure of wise skepticism, the fascination of the diaspora mentality, and the appeal of religiosity. We are the grandchildren of the revolutionaries, of the founding fathers and mothers, the first generation of chalutzim, pioneers, who left behind their books, parents, and language to carry out a revolution, a necessary revolution. Land, language, work, and socialism were the ideals that became reality during their lifetimes. This did not leave their children, our parents, much room for innovation. For them, the second generation, the Hebrew language, land, and work had become a fact of life. They strove to excel in the army, in the professions, in industry and agriculture. In short, to fulfill their parents' dreams of becoming sabras. They mocked intellectuals, spoke the local vernacular, went barefoot, took on Hebrew names. Growing up in the giant shadow of the first generation pioneers, the second generation spoke little and did much. We, she says to these members of Knesset, the grandchildren found a normal country, for better and for worse, and because we were able to shake off the artificiality of some of the new Hebrew roles, the revolution became possible. The balance between body and spirit began to be restored along with the legitimization of study. It might be said that we have come full circle, sitting down next to our grandparents in the Beit Midrash as sovereign, discerning, and curious partners in study. A Torah student is invited to delve into God's Torah without having to make even the slightest concession concerning one's beliefs or lifestyle. Moreover, if the secular community abandons these texts that for so many years have, together with many other excellent texts taken from the literature of other cultures, formed the foundation of the Jewish Hebrew culture, those sources will remain unredeemed. The texts are liable to languish within professional institutions, many of which have not truly challenged the Torah with new questions for many generations. Now, the ultra-Orthodox preservation of the ancient premises does an injustice to the traditional concept of Talmud Torah and does not truly fulfill it. We are meant to sit across from people that we disagree with. And we are open to looking at something differently. The secular study revolution is not a rebellion of one community against another. It might appear that often, that in my city now, that's what goes on, but that's not what this is meant to be. Secularity and the treatment of the text as human creations are no longer a revolutionary innovation requiring a battle. Religious Torah students who relate differently to the texts and who have a halachic commitment arouse curiosity and make it possible to conduct a productive debate. She goes on, before she takes her oath, to say that this is the responsibility of the Knesset, to make sure that all she's feeling is felt by her fellow Knesset leaders to be the responsibility of a parliament which represents the Jewish state. I get goosebumps still every time I listen to it or read her. Now, whether she inspired, she doesn't stand alone in this. Now, for a long time, one of the things I've loved about being in this country is that you'll turn on the radio and you'll hear a song that's on the hit parade, but the words are from the Tanakh or from the Talmud. Well, we've taken it a step further, and I'll just give one more example. The man you're looking at, Kobe Oz, is a rock star. And he says the following, and this is going back a few years. I feel like a fish that spent its entire life in an aquarium and has suddenly discovered the sea. Kobe Oz enthused prior to going on stage with his new set. And what is his new set? Playing in front of young audiences, Tehillim for the perplexed, Psalms for the perplexed, all of it written after several years of his soaking in the rich marinade of Judaism. The excitement of Oz, former singer-songwriter of the Israeli superband Tipex, is now shared by artists throughout the country. Israelis are realizing that Zionism is only one chapter of the Jewish history. Now we want to enjoy the whole book. It's not as if the language of the Bible or Talmud, he says, is foreign to secular Israelis. Notwithstanding the cruel characterization of the general populace as Hebrew-speaking goyim, that's awful. Even the most secular students study Jewish history, Bible, and Jewish thought. Yet few imagined that the rich culture might be shared by anyone other than the strictly Orthodox. In the past few years, all of this has changed. Throughout the Israeli pop world, the language, ideas, and character of ancient Jewish texts are suddenly common currency. So what's happening? Has secular Israel gone from? I'm going to say no. But truer is what he goes on to say. The answer is far more complex, fascinating, and hopeful. It would seem that unexpectedly, unpredictably, and in often contradictory ways, Jewish learning and literacy has become a significant part of Israeli popular culture, regardless of belief or observance. Oz sees this blending of the traditional and the modern, of the textual and the personal, as an inspiring liberation, as the Zionist narrative plays a lesser role in our lives, meaning that we got it, we've got our land. It leaves room for us to create a new model. What it is to be a Jew in the land of Israel. This sounds like a utopia. We're far from a utopia, but this is very accurate what Oz is describing. I believe that the psukim in Sefer Dvarim, Rav Kook, Rav Hirsch, Rav Steinsaltz, the Bezalel student, and Dr. Calderon and Oz understood that the Torah belongs l'kol Yisrael, to all of Israel. And I believe that they will accept the image of Yerushalayim in the picture before us. Anybody know what you are looking at?
The 12 tribes.
The 12 tribes, yes?
The breastplate of the high priest.
Yes. Okay, now, in ancient times, the land of Israel was divided, we know, amongst the Shvatim, the tribes. Yerushalayim, however, was said to belong to all of Israel. Now, there's some spiritual significance in that. In other words, some have suggested it means there's no room for the concept of private ownership in Yerushalayim because everything belongs to all of Israel. The Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, was commanded to wear this choshen, this breastplate, that had these 12 different precious stones, each one representing a different tribe. Why do you think that was required of the Kohen Gadol as he went into the temple? Wearing this breastplate, and each one had to be in place or it wasn't proper. Why? He's going into the temple. Why wear this? Are there not so many other things that he might have been asked to wear? Anybody?
The Kohen Gadol was representing all, as Brenda said at the beginning, all of Israel.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the fact of the matter is, Bracha, that this
Marlene?
would be something that he would be wearing closest to his heart, which again goes back to the to what you brought us from the book of Deuteronomy about circumcising this upon your heart. And so this would be a reminder to him of what his job entailed.
Beautiful. Absolutely. He's a shaliach of all these tribes, and he can never forget that. He's that middle person in there with God and always with Israel. Beautiful. Now, the same people who suggest this idea of it symbolizing there's no place in Yerushalayim if it belongs to everyone for private ownership suggests that it is urging us to elevate ourselves above egotism, which is symbolized by private ownership. Now, we won't get into a discussion of capitalism, etc., but that's one thing. Perhaps more importantly, and if we keep in mind the divisions between groups of people, several groups of people in this city, that it's also urging us that they are all united on that breastplate, that there is no room for sectarianism. No particular group can claim exclusive rights to Yerushalayim. Each stone represents a different and legitimate part of our nation that stands at Sinai. But now let me ask you, which Yerushalayim are we referring to? Is it Yerushalayim Shel Mala, or is it Yerushalayim Shel Mata? In other words, are we thinking of heavenly Yerushalayim or of earthly Yerushalayim as we speak about this city that we will in a couple of days celebrate its unification. So Harav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha, the great teacher and head of the Etzion Yeshiva, in these two paragraphs, I think, sums up very articulately, beautifully, the differences in Yerushalayim Shel Mala v'Shel Mata, but agreeing that whether it is holy or not the particularly holy, they are equally important. So follow with me. A makom kadosh, a holy place, is an area detached from day-to-day life. Think about it. We make Kiddush as we begin Shabbat, which is different from everyday life, etc., etc. I'll say that again. A makom kadosh is an area detached from day-to-day life, designated exclusively for matters of absolute holiness. That absolute is very, very significant there because it's not real, so it's easy to keep it absolute. Activities associated with the ongoing existence of the individual, however acceptable and spiritually significant they may be, have no place in the Azara. The Azara was the courtyard to the temple. Even the simplest, most elementary activities are forbidden in the Azara. For example, no one may even sit in the Azara, and sleeping there is certainly forbidden. In short, the Azara is characterized by its being reserved exclusively for Kedusha. Interesting, two of the restrictions upon those entering the temple were, before entering, remove your shoes. Anybody want to take a guess at what the other was? One other?
Have to go to the
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands is a good guess.
mikvah.
Mikvah? Anybody else? Before going in, they had to leave behind their belt that had their wallet.
Oy.
Now, somebody? Both of those, the shoes, which allows you to usually go about your business, and the wallet, which certainly has to do with day-to-day affairs, you're leaving that behind. And there is a time to leave the mundane behind and just be in Makom Kadosh. And whether it's in Yerushalayim and thinking of the Beit HaMikdash and the Western Wall, or whether it's in Toronto and being in the shul, please God, someday soon. Those are moments that are meant to be kadosh. We might leave the kadosh to come to the mundane a little differently, but there's nothing wrong in having those moments. Now, Yerushalayim Shel Mata. However, in the camp of Israel, i.e., earthly Jerusalem, the commitment to the Almighty and his service is not expressed through a detachment from the general exigencies of human existence, nor through dissociation from the everyday mundane matters of life, as Shimon Bar Yochai came to learn. The camp of Israel, the same region that lies off limits to the Mitzorah, the one plagued with leprosy, because of its inherent spiritual quality, is also an encampment of banners and marching soldiers. This region involves all areas of life. It is an area of eating and sleeping, of industry and commerce. These activities, however, are conducted in the shadow of the temple with a clear sense of standing before God, with the rigorous standards of a makom tahor, not kadosh, but a pure place. Now, if I had thought quickly enough, I would have asked you to think of what you thought tahor meant. I'm sure some of you know. So, it's not makom kadosh, it's not the temple, and it's the mundane, and it's people getting into arguments, having crises, dealing with real life issues, which are normal. So it might not be kadosh, but Lichtenstein points out it is still considered pure. Very, very important. What that's saying is that these actual day-to-day goings on are as important. And as we said last week, we need these earthly phenomena in order to have the opportunity to reach the kadosh. So when one lives in Yerushalayim, truth be told, I don't think I've been to the Kotel in the year and a half that I've been here. And probably the moments that I feel spirituality are in more the mundane. Or last week we didn't have the campfires, so trucks were driving by singing Lag BaOmer songs. Those kinds of things are what does it for me. Being in Yerushalayim and in Zion gives us an opportunity to live out the Torah, not just in our personal lives, but on a national level. Once we come into our land and we are sovereign and we are the ones in charge, that means things have to be a little different, because we're not just going to have somebody else do certain things. I'm referring to now different issues on Shabbat. So what are certain issues that we have had to struggle with and people have studied? And it's not just loopholes, but it's a matter of remembering that we live in our own country, we have to be in charge, we have to do, but we still want to remember that it's Shabbat. So anything from kibbutzim, having to come up with systems of how on Shabbat to milk the cow. You can't let the cow suffer, but you do it in a way that you're still remembering Shabbat. Because somebody could say, well, can't you just press that button now? Or doctors, nurses in hospitals on Shabbat. What are you going to say, that no Jewish doctors in Yerushalayim, in all of Israel, are going to go to work on Shabbat? No. So there are variations, but people sit in different institutions, whether it's halacha and technology, or whether it's up in Haifa, the Technion having, and it's an American medical school that works together with a higher yeshiva wanting its doctors to learn medical ethics. These are all opportunities to say that let's internalize the principles of our Torah and Talmud into the day-to-day. we look at our text to help us figure out what do we do? Do we return prisoners in order to bring back hostages? What should be happening at the Kotel during Tefillah? I want to bring one more example, that of Shemitah. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware, but coming up, Rosh Hashanah, 2021, 2022, 5782 is the year of the Shemitah. Now, that's a real issue. Yes, it exists in contemporary Israel in different ways. There are some loopholes, some people take it seriously, but I bring this in because there's a marvelous organization that's dealing with looking at this ancient mitzvah of Shemitah, of letting the land rest, like in every 7-year Shabbat, and being guided again by our Torah. So Rav Kook, who we met earlier, gives, and it's so beautiful that I bring that before we get to the practical. Life can only be perfected, Kook says, through the affording of a breathing space from the bustle of everyday life. What the Shabbat achieves regarding the individual, the Shemitah achieves with regard to the nation as a whole. This nation, in which the divine spirit dwells prominent and eternal, has special need of expressing from time to time the revelation of its own divine light at its fullest brightness, not suppressed by the cares and toil of the passions and rivalries of everyday life. The coarseness, which is bound to be present in public life, causes the deterioration of moral standards. And there is a constant conflict between the ideal of loving kindness, truthfulness, compassion, and pity on the one hand, the pressure for material gain inevitable in daily life on the other, causing the distancing of the divine, the periodical suspension of the normal social routine raises this nation when morally settled, spiritually and morally. So beautifully said. If that isn't a good enough reason to have that 7th year, but it in a real world causes all kinds of complications. So I'm referring to the Mandel Leadership Symposium that took place already last year in anticipation of next year, the Shemitah. Dreaming big dreams and engaging in long-term planning are two of the central features of the leadership model that we promote at the Mandel Leadership Institute, said Program Director Mishael Zion in his opening address. We see the Shemitah year as an opportunity to advance a range of activities in Israeli society based on a broad vision for Jewish culture, he continued. The Shemitah year is the Jewish people's sabbatical year, offering an opportunity for a new form of dialogue on issues such as solidarity, education, environment, social equality, economics, and our relationship with our land and with the earth. In other words, there are concepts and moral ideas behind the very specific laws of Shemitah. Rabbi Michael Melchior noted that in the past, public engagement with the Shemitah year focused only on the challenges posed by the agricultural restrictions in Jewish law, and this only affected very limited population groups. In recent years, however, a much broader social discourse has emerged regarding the Shemitah year. This was driven by initiatives led by organizations such as Teva Ivri, Pa'amonim, and many others, among other factors. The upcoming Shemitah year will be a major year of discussion and action on social, environmental, and economic issues in Israel at a national level, with government resources to be allocated via a state Shemitah commission. The relevant government ministries, the ministries of education, the environment, and social affairs are also committed to this enterprise, Einat Kramer said. There is so much one can do to live a Jewish life outside of Zion. But when it comes to these kinds of things, Jerusalem, Zichron Yaakov, Rehovot, Renana, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim is the place to allow this, to give Torah a real presence nationally. Going back to Rav Lichtenstein, he's no fool. He realizes that Yerushalayim and Zion has a long way to go. But we dare not forget our historical responsibility to ensure the purity of the city continues perpetually. It is true that it was sufficient for Jerusalem to be sanctified only once and to be defined as a makom tahor, a pure place, once. The Rambam rules that the status of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem was not abrogated by our exile from the land, and it continues unabated to this day. Nevertheless, we must remain eternally vigilant to preserve the status of Yerushalayim as a makom tahor. During the inauguration ceremony of the tabernacle, Moshe sprinkles anointing oil on the outer altar, thereby sanctifying it for the holy service. The Ramban Nachmanides there comments that this is reenacted when the high priest sprinkles the blood of the offerings on the inner altar each and every Yom Kippur. He shall sprinkle the blood on it with his fingers 7 times. Thus he shall purify it and sanctify it from the impurities of the Israelites. And Lichtenstein says, if the altar inside the tabernacle requires a renewed sanctification and purification each year, how much more so does our city of Yerushalayim, the Makom Kadosh and the Makom Tahor, require an annual rededication, which should be the purpose of the soon-to-be Yom Yerushalayim. Now, I want us to go back to the very, very beginning. Having said what we have said, please look at my wonderful colors in the title, From Sinai to Jerusalem, Zion. Can anybody explain the brown and the green? This is a test of what we've just discussed. Please unmute yourself if you'd like to.
The brown is desert, and then there's the green of our city.
Let's be a little more specific.
Okay.
Rebirth, growth, development.
Okay. You see, it was,
Of the land, it's the greening of the land.
okay. Now, when you say greening, what do you mean? And when you, I think Bev said growing of the land, what did you mean? Is there a difference? What did you mean by land, one of you, or anybody else?
Oh, we have to keep developing. You know, the concept of spring, the green is going forward. So I'm just thinking that, you know, as we were talking about, you know, renewal and reinterpretation, using our ancient texts to continue the development of our understanding and, you know, continuing to learn.
Beautiful. Anyone else? That says it all. We are from the desert, the earthy Sinai, to Jerusalem and Zion, that is really, really blossoming, but the green does represent the ongoing growth that we experience here and we continue to strive for eternally. Anyone, another comment? Though I've just ended that pretty poetically. Well, I want to wish everyone a Chag Yerushalayim Sameach, and please stay well.
Thank you. Thank you, Bracha.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Bracha.
Thank you, Bracha.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love
Thank
you.
you.
Yeshika.
Okay.
Great lesson. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.